Australians living with diabetes have twice the risk of developing depression. Changes in lifestyle and new tough management regimes can lead to diabetes not being managed effectively.
Well, to give us an insight into why those diagnosed with diabetes suffer with depression and anxiety, we're joined by the Chief Executive of Diabetes New South Wales, Sturt Eastwood. Sturt, good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
So why is it that those with diabetes suffer from depression?
I think there's two ways to answer that question. Firstly, a diagnosis of diabetes, and we need to be clear there are different forms of diabetes, and they each have their own impact, but a diagnosis that says your life has changed forever and you now need to be conscious about how you behave and what you do creates an element of uncertainty and stress that lives with that person. Their regime of management, it doesn't change for their birthday, it doesn't change on Christmas Day, it's constant.
And sorry, I should stop you there and clarify that, as you say, there are different types of diabetes. We're talking about type 2 diabetes, which is late onset diabetes. Essentially, more often than not, they're diagnosed when they're adults.
If we talk specifically about type 2, then more often than not, yes, diagnosed as adults. But let's tell a story to set the scene. So if we talk about type 1, which is an autoimmune disease, you have no control over whether you develop this particular condition or not. And let's say I'm 3 years old. I'm uncertain as to what's happening. My parents feel responsible for me. And all of a sudden they have a child that has a life-threatening condition that changes the entire way they have to deal with this child. They need to understand this condition. They need to monitor it 24/7. And that discipline really puts a lot of stress across their entire lifestyle and their entire lifetime. Now, if we go to later onset, and type 2 as we call it, there's probably 4 key factors that drive that. So, firstly, we talk about ageing. So that, in many respects, is driving the increase in type 2. Secondly, your ethnic background. Thirdly, your, family history. And fourthly, it's probably lifestyle. And we could term that obesity. If I develop type 2, again, I have what does this mean for me? What is it? What do I need to do? My life changes. Every meal, every piece of exercise, every bit of spontaneous activity I now need to think about. And the regime, as I said, never ends.
So are people being helped through this process as you've just described? It's obviously very challenging for all involved.
So I think it's a little bit like parenthood. There's really no rule book. So certainly the various diabetes fraternities do our best to provide educational material and so forth. One of the issues, though, and the reason that we are running with this Healthy Mind campaign at the moment is that the primary healthcare system, so your GP and the pharmacist and etc., allied health professionals, deal specifically with the most immediate and most critical issue, which is quite frankly the physical part of this and then the potential complications if it's not managed well. What gets lost in there is people's emotional well-being. Now, statistics, and there's quite a bit of research around to show that 50%, you are more than 50% more likely if you have diabetes and all these associated just management issues, and we'll put stigmatisation and discrimination aside, which is again another element that feeds into this equation, that while they're dealing with the physical issues, they actually, I won't say ignore, but it sits as a secondary. So part of our campaign, in fact the main thrust of our campaign is to make people aware and self-empowered that have diabetes, make the carers also aware of their own situation, because much of this stress actually sits with the carers as well, and that the GPs also take this into account when they're thinking about the holistic way and the cycle of care that needs to be provided around these particular people.
So I have a daughter who has type 1 diabetes, and I can appreciate the constant and relentless management of this disease. How then, if someone develops depression, how does that impact the management of diabetes?
Okay, so there's another piece I put on the table which says actually if you have depression you are more likely to develop diabetes as well. So there's actually a two-way street here. And part of that's around the lifestyle side, yes. So I think the easiest way to think about this is to be aware that this is a very likely possibility, to continually monitor your own moods and your own situation, to reach out for help. And this is not, and there's a lot of, what would you say, support services available, not just in the diabetes fraternity, but elsewhere. And to make sure you don't develop to a point where your emotional state starts to impact your ability to manage the diabetes, physical diabetes situation well. Otherwise, the two issues compound and actually accelerate.
So how well known do you think this is amongst the fraternity itself, the small community, and then more broadly about how there are psychological and physical aspects to this disease?
So the quick answer is not well. I think it's well understood from a research point of view that these connections exist. The primary healthcare system, so let's say the general practitioners, and my hat goes off to them because they have to deal with a huge range of conditions. In many respects, Diabetes New South Wales, we are a one-trick pony, so we specifically have a look at this. Our surveys say that one, you are more likely to develop an emotional stressed state, ranging from anxiety through to depression, and that two, of the members that we've surveyed, 98% do not think about their emotional state in their cycle of care. So they think about their eyes and ophthalmologists, they think about their feet and podiatrists, but any sort of emotional counselling or support is not considered. And so we'd like to raise that as to raise the profile generally, so that the GP starts the conversation, so that the carer or the person with diabetes raises the conversation, so that their care becomes more holistic in nature.
Stuart Eastwood, thank you very much for explaining what is a growing problem.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.